People are just walking in front of it like we're not recording.
It happens. People are people. None of it's intentional. Never attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. It's far more likely that they're all in their own worlds, doing their own thing. They're not paying attention to the world around them. And we all do it every day, whether you're driving, walking down the street. All of our lives are just as complex as everybody else's. Everything you have going on, they have going on. Nobody knows what everybody else is going through. We also need to be a little more self-aware and aware of the world around us.
That was deep.
You gotta look deep to find the deep things. If all you ever do in your life is stay at the surface, you'll never find anything worth exploring.
Are you real?
I try to be.
Are you an AI?
No, not at all.
Have you ever caught your own reflection and felt like a stranger was looking back? Not because your face had changed, but because for a split second you realized you weren't sure who was behind it. That's how self-awareness begins, not as a flash of clarity, but as a fracture. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's the moment the fracture starts, when something beneath the surface rises, a quiet sense that the thoughts you think might not be yours, that the life you're living might be borrowed, that the person others see isn't the one you feel. It doesn't scream, it doesn't announce itself. It whispers, in the silence between actions, in the discomfort after pretending, in the questions you can't unask once they're spoken. You start noticing things, not about the world, about you. Why you said yes when you meant no, why you laughed when it wasn't funny, why you filled the silence instead of sitting in it. And it hits harder because no one else notices. On the outside, nothing has changed. But on the inside, a quiet storm is forming. One that doesn't look like awakening. It looks like disorientation. This isn't the beginning of peace. It's the beginning of undoing. The realization that you've been following a script you didn't write, and now the ink is starting to fade. Real self-awareness doesn't arrive with a smile. It comes wrapped in silence, doubt, and the realization that you've never really met yourself. And that's when it starts. The slow unraveling of the mask you didn't even know you were wearing. You weren't trying to deceive anyone. You were trying to survive, fit in, belong. So you adapted. To what your family expected, to what your friends needed, to what your culture rewarded. Until one day, the version of you that was real got buried beneath the version that worked. Jung called it the persona, the social mask. Not a lie, just a filter. A way to move through the world without showing what the world doesn't want to see. But over time, you forget it's a mask. And when people love it, you confuse it for love of you. When they applaud it, you think you're the one being seen. Until someone looks at you with real eyes, and you realize you've been performing for so long, you're not even sure where the act ends. Schopenhauer saw this too. He wrote that society runs on illusion, not because people are malicious, but because illusion is more comfortable than truth. We all play roles because playing a role is easier than standing exposed. You didn't create the mask to manipulate. You created it to be accepted. But acceptance earned through performance is fragile. It demands consistency. It punishes honesty. And worst of all, it trains you to betray yourself in small ways, over and over, until the betrayal feels like your personality. You didn't fake your way through life. You just became who the world needed you to be, until you forgot who you were without the performance. But beneath that mask, something has been watching, something quieter than your thoughts, something older than your name, and it's beginning to stir. There's a part of you you try not to look at, not because it's evil, but because it's honest, too honest. It shows up in your defensiveness, in your envy, in the moment you judge someone for doing what you secretly want. It's the voice you silence, the urge you deny, the truth you dress in softer words so it won't make people uncomfortable. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the side of you you'd rather not be on, but still are. Everything you've pushed away, Everything you weren't allowed to feel. Everything you were punished for expressing. All of it waits there, beneath the surface. Not dead, just ignored. You don't escape the shadow by being good. You don't silence it with positive thoughts. You can meditate, you can journal, you can repeat affirmations. But if you haven't faced the parts of yourself you're afraid to admit exist, you're not self-aware, you're self-avoiding. Nietzsche wrote, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into the abyss gazes also into you." But what he didn't say is that sometimes what you see in the abyss is your reflection. We're told to chase light, to be kind, to forgive, but real wholeness doesn't come from editing your humanity. It comes from integrating it, not to excuse it, but to stop being controlled by what you refuse to acknowledge. The longer you run from your shadow, the more it runs your life. Silently. From behind your habits, your relationships, your outbursts, your shame. Because what you reject in yourself doesn't disappear. It distorts. And one day it comes out sideways, in the exact way you swore it never would. Most people spend their lives running from their shadow, but the ones who don't, the ones who turn and face it, don't come back the same. Because when you finally look that shadow in the eye, the peace you thought you had begins to crack. You were told that finding yourself would bring peace, that once you became aware, the chaos would stop, that healing would feel like calm. But the truth is harder, because peace doesn't come first. Disillusionment does. Schopenhauer believed that most of human suffering is born from illusion, the illusion that life has a fixed meaning, that people are rational, that happiness is earned through control, and self-awareness destroys illusion. It doesn't soften life, it strips it, until what's left is raw, unpredictable, and painfully real. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Because the soul doesn't always speak gently. It points to everything you've avoided, everything you've projected, everything that's still bleeding beneath the surface. Smile." So when you start becoming aware of your patterns, your impulses, your unspoken wounds, it doesn't feel like awakening. It feels like loss, the loss of certainty, the loss of comfort, the loss of who you thought you were. And the mind resists that, because the mind was built to protect you, not reveal you. It learns how to keep the pain hidden, how to rationalize your choices, how to call survival clarity, even when that clarity is just a controlled collapse. You smile at people who drain you. You explain yourself to be understood. You try to stay kind in rooms where you are shrinking. All because the mind is wired to keep the system running, even when it's killing the self inside it. You thought the pain meant something was wrong, but sometimes pain is just what truth feels like, when it hasn't been spoken in years. You were told awakening would bring peace, but awareness isn't peace. It's the end of fantasy, and once you see clearly, you begin to see who doesn't want to see you anymore. Self-awareness doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you see others, and how they see you. You start noticing what you used to excuse, conversations that go nowhere, laughter that feels empty, relationships that only exist when you're shrinking. You start pulling back, not to punish anyone, but to protect what you're finally starting to hear inside yourself. Carl Jung believed that individuation, becoming who you truly are, requires stepping away from the collective. And the moment you do that, you break the contract you never knew you signed. The one that said, "I'll be who you need if it means you'll stay." But now you're not performing. You're not pleasing. You're not softening your truth just to keep the peace. And that's when the shift begins. The people who once praised your kindness call you distant. The ones who relied on your silence accuse you of changing. And they're not wrong. You are changing, but not in the way they think. You're not becoming colder, you're becoming clearer. You're not pulling away out of spite. You're making space for something real. Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe, because the tribe needs you to stay predictable, to follow the rhythm, to play the role. And when you don't, you become a mirror, not of who they are, but of what they're refusing to face. That's why they pull back. That's why they resist. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you're no longer easy to use. They don't hate who you are. They hate that you stopped playing your part. And yet through that silence, something begins to form. Something painful and clean. At first, clarity feels like a curse. You see what you used to overlook. You hear what people aren't saying. You feel when a room goes hollow, even if no one moves. It's not a skill. It's a sensitivity. One that makes small talk exhausting, crowds unbearable, and half-truths impossible to swallow. Carl Jung said that integration is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness demands contradiction. You hold both the fire and the stillness, the anger and the compassion, the fear and the courage to keep moving anyway. But that kind of strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek approval. It just stands, quietly, fully, without asking permission. And that's what makes it powerful. You're no longer a reaction. You're a presence, one that doesn't need to explain itself. Schopenhauer once wrote that wisdom isolates, not because the wise push others away, but because the world resists anything that threatens its illusions. When you stop playing along, you become difficult to read. When you stop explaining yourself, you become difficult to manipulate. And when you stop needing validation, you start noticing how few things actually deserve your energy. Clarity strips away what isn't true, and at first that feels like loss. But eventually, something deeper begins to emerge. Not happiness, not excitement, but presence. Grounded, unshakable, clean. This isn't about feeling better. It's about becoming real. And when the noise falls away, what's left is someone you've never truly met. But once you've seen yourself that clearly, what do you do with it? What happens after the illusion breaks, after the roles fall away, after the noise stops and you're left with yourself? Fully awake? Carl Jung called this process individuation, not a destination, but a return to the self that always existed beneath the roles, the guilt, the noise. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. But don't mistake that for ease. You won't be applauded for this. You won't be understood by everyone. You may not even be recognized by the people who once loved you, because they loved the version of you that asked for nothing, that smiled through exhaustion, that disappeared a little more each time they needed space. Now you are space, not for others to fill, but to exist in freely, without apology. Nietzsche wrote, "Become who you are." But becoming is painful. It requires self-betrayal to stop. It requires ego to collapse. It requires love that no longer depends on being accepted. You don't find yourself through comfort. You find yourself in the fire, in the silence, in the questions no one else wants to ask. And once you begin, there's no going back. Schopenhauer believed that truth isolates, but in that isolation, something rare is born. Not loneliness, but sovereignty. The kind of peace that doesn't need to be seen to exist. You are no longer playing the game. You are no longer a reaction. You are no longer a mask. You are the watcher behind the thoughts, The voice behind the voice. The stillness behind the storm. Self-awareness won't save you, but it will set you free. And that is enough. So the only question left is this. Now that you've seen yourself clearly, will you choose to live that way?